Welcome to episode number 24 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast, recorded June the 4th, 2019. My name is Eric. I'm the host of the show. I'm based in Southern Ontario. I'm a hunter, target shooter, ham radio operator, VE3 EPN, and computer geek. I got into preparedness when I was working frontline emergency services and witnessed an over-reliance on emergency services during major events such as ice storms, power outages, etc. I started a small preparedness company to help people get prepared and to be able to look after themselves for at least 72 hours, if not longer.
Well, greetings from an alternate location. My name is Ian. I live on a small hobby farm. I'm an outdoor enthusiast, sport shooter, reloader, and my farm is designated handyman.
I'm Alan. My friends and family call me a safety nerd. As a first responder, I have developed a mind for safety over the years. I teach first aid, coach my family and friends to be better prepared. I'm a locksmith by trade. I've worked in the physical security industry for more than 20 years now.
And my name is Hughes Mackay. This is my first time on a podcast. I'm from Canada's East Coast. I'm a former member of the Canadian Armed Forces, current first responder. I also hold a private pilot's license with float endorsement, and I've just gotten into the world of lockpicking. I'm also a hunter and competition and target shooter.
All right.
And possibly the most accomplished person that we know.
There's a lot to live up to on this chat.
Well, we've got some tumbling content for you that'll open some new doors to your preps in this episode. We're going to start off with some news articles relating to preparedness in the outdoors. Next, we'll be letting you know how we've improved our preparedness since our last episode, which was a little while ago. And then we'll get into the main topic of the episode, locksmithing for preppers. Let's move into some news articles.
The article I put up is a note from Kelowna. Seems all the news that I find happens out in BC. I'm going to blame that on Ian. Came from Kelowna, from the town of Vernon, and there was a break-in under there that resulted in a stabbing. Now, in most modern terms, we would consider that a home invasion, and it's a really good reason to make sure that your home is properly secured.
Well, and chances are, if the homeowner did fight back, they'd be charging the homeowner with something too. So it's a typical Canadian story, I guess, right?
Yeah, anything is possible. Yes.
Yeah, there was actually a one in Southern Ontario where the guy actually did do a home invasion. The homeowner did shoot him, and of course they asked for a lower sentence because he got shot during the home invasion because he had to go through enough. I was like, I'm actually you should be happy he's still breathing, really, but. You know,
you would think. But,
yeah. I would say because he was using an airsoft pistol at the time, he should probably be charged more because that's they consider stuff like that firearms when you actually use them in a nefarious purpose. But
that's true.
Yep.
Anyway,
well, then that to me is an imminent threat of grievous bodily harm or death, which is within the use of force spectrum a good reason or a justifiable reason to apply lethal force.
Yeah,
I would agree with you.
It was a bizarre little story when I read that today, but as for myself, I just noticed in the news there, actually it's a couple weeks old now, I guess, because of the delay with the podcast, but we had the first wildfire this season in BC. It was in a traditionally fire-prone area, but surprisingly the residents weren't quite ready because they felt it was just too early for fires. So it was up near a place called Fraser Lake, and they ended up having an evacuation order, and they were all caught with their pants down because it wasn't the season yet. I was kind of giggling about that more than anything else, so I threw the link in there as well.
I have that feeling about Christmas every time it comes around, but I don't have to evacuate when that happens.
Yeah, and well, actually, I noticed that Fort McMurray's up in a blaze again too, like 10 miles south of town or something. It's on fire again.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, so another. Actually, one of our friends from the International Preppers Network is actually up there fighting the fire right now. So that's how I heard about that one.
Well, anyway, there we go.
Yeah, so another interesting thing is from the CBC. So civil asset forfeiture laws are coming soon to Canada. So basically, because we've had a problem in BC again, of course, with money laundering from foreign sources, which has been driving the real estate boom here for quite a while. But they basically decided to crack down on that. But basically, their new rule is going to be if you can't explain where your money came from, they're just going to take it. So that has a huge potential for abuse. But it's a very interesting story. We're definitely worth the read. So I threw in the link for that one. The last one I just thought I'd mention quickly is that Bill C-71 actually passed the Senate. So it's waiting on royal assent, but it's getting close. So yeah, so prepare accordingly for that. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm just saying it's probably a good idea to start being more firearms aware when it comes to current law. And that's what for me.
All right. I've got a link in here in regards to the tornadoes that struck east end of Ottawa area. So I'm sure if you've been listening to the news last little bit that you've heard about that. An interesting thing I heard earlier today in regards to that was the emergency alerts that go out on the mobile networks. A lot of people were complaining that they did not get notification that these tornadoes were actually coming their way. So there was some advanced knowledge that it was happening and some warnings that were sent out. But a bunch of people out that way said that their phones never got any kind of an alert or any kind of a message to warn them that it was coming. So there's still some bugs to be fixed in that system from the sounds of it. But link in the notes. It's
almost as if you shouldn't rely on other people for your own safety.
Oh, look at that. Get out of here.
I'm pretty sure the government's going to take care of us. Come on now.
Yep. Yeah, we should just shut the podcast down, forget about prepping, and yeah. All right, so that's the last.
Isn't that the most? Isn't that the biggest lie ever told? You can trust me. I'm with the government.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm from the government. I'm here to help.
Ah, yes.
Anyways, we're on the wrong CPP for a rant like that.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Anyway.
All right, so let's move into what we've done lately for our preps. So, for myself, we've just been getting the house cleaned up, painting, and getting rooms all organized with some good news. Got a little one on the way due in October. So,
yay!
That's awesome.
So we're
your preps are no longer relevant.
Yeah, so that's been the projects for the last while.
Well, you just have to open a whole new chapter of preparedness requirements now.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a fun adventure.
Excellent.
That's one word for it.
Pretty exciting. Yeah, Canada's youngest prepper coming up here. Yeah.
I've been hitting the books hard. I'm studying for my ham radio license. Actually got to do some really cool forced entry training this week, which was a really good time, including some wall breaching, where I literally just took a tool, smashed a hole through two sides of the wall, and then threw myself through it, which is it's a lot more fun than I was expecting it to be. Added some intermittent fasting to my fitness cycle, which is pretty cool to put out more effort without needing food. Keeping myself on a reduced calorie and focused calories, so I'm only eating once or twice a day now, which is really kind of changing the way that I do things. But I figure if the worst comes to worst, then being able to be functional while not fully fueled is probably a good thing to have. Rotated the fuel stores, my gas stock. Definitely need to add more to that, but that's coming there. And started my earnest search for portable wood stove to keep our home warm in the event of a disaster. So I'm planning to have that all ready to go before it gets cold again around here.
Actually, intermittent fasting. My wife's a big believer in the IF like that. So you do like a 16-hour fast, or how does that work for you? I'm typically doing 18 to 20 right now. So and I do that 3 or 4 days a week, and then no less than 16 in between. Which now that I've gotten used to it, it makes my days more productive. So
what meal do you cut out? Do you typically cut out breakfast, or?
I try and not cut out any one particular meal. So usually breakfast. Go to the gym without having breakfast, and then I don't eat till about noon. Stop eating about 6, and then carry on until noon the next day, or stop at 6 and don't eat until 2 the next day, depending on the work schedule that I'm on. And then sometimes recently I did a almost 30 hours, and then had breakfast, lunch, and skipped dinner, just to change it up and see how I react to it.
Actually, I find it worked really well for me. If I'm at home for a good stretch, I can get up to a regular 16 hours, and it works out really well. It keeps the snacking down at a minimum. But as soon as I'm at work and on the road and stuff, it's just it falls apart, and it's hard to maintain with the regular schedules, right?
Well, and if you don't have a regular work schedule, then it makes it very difficult to do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would expect in your line of business, you don't get the option to just stop what you're doing at the 16-hour mark and say, well, I get to eat now.
No more eating. Yeah, no, it's pretty tough. So, what about you, Hughes? Have you been up to anything?
Yeah, so I mean, with with spring being upon us and almost summer, I've taken a lot of time to do a lot of maintenance on some of the small engine stuff that I've got, a lot of cleanup around the property as well. And then one of the things I kind of neglected over winter was my fuel store. So I still rotate them as often as I can, but some of the fuel was starting to get quite old, so I was dumping that into my vehicle and then refilling the jerry cans at that point. Other than that, I mean, it's not, to me, preparedness is not just about, things that you accumulate, but also skills that you learn. So I've been trying to the point that you guys were talking about, eating healthier, getting more exercise, and especially with the nicer weather, and then always trying to pick up a new skill. And that's what led me to being on this episode specifically, which is about lockpicking. And it's anyways, we'll talk about it more. But yeah, that's something I'm a big believer in. It's not just the stuff that you accumulate as a prepper, but the skills that you gain as well. So that's what I've been up to there.
Awesome. Well, originally I was going to say I'd been at work a lot since the last show, but we had that extra week off, so it worked out well, and I had a pretty busy week. So I managed to use the online time away from home to put in for some limited entry draw hunts in BC. You have to put in for draws for certain animals, because I'm planning to meet up with a fellow prepper in Cranbrook this fall, so it should be an interesting hunt. Had time to renew some contacts, study for the ham radio exam. When I was home, luck prevailed around the local area around my house. I was able to harvest a bear in the spring bear hunt. So I had a very successful attempt at pressure canning. I would say I did, but actually I didn't. My wife did. So she was able to do some pressure canning, and I think we put 20 pounds of meat into the pressure canning with bear, and it was awesome. It worked out really tender, and yeah, it was fantastic.
Good amount of meat, yeah.
Yeah, and really for a little bit of salt, pepper, and garlic, it went from being like gamey, tough meat to fall off the bone kind of roast beef, and it was fantastic. So, but I did manage to be the sous chef and help her make some bear chorizo and summer sausage, and it worked out really well. So we were kind of happy. That was our first attempt at all of that, and very, very successful. So,
Nice.
Yeah, and then I managed to meet up with Prepper Ryan from our group from a recent work trip here. So it was always nice to expand the Prepper network and meet up with like-minded people. That was fantastic. We had a good visit. And then that was our first face-to-face. And let's see here. So I had the Hot Springs meet and greet. Not as well attended as I would have liked. And we actually had a couple last-minute cancellations. But did have some people there. And fun was had by all, despite we had a solid day of rain on the Saturday. Funny story. Normally I bring a bunch of 22 ammunition for the kids. I had a couple girls there that were like under 15, and normally they clack away the 22, but they kind of looked at my Ruger PT carbine I had with me at the time, which is 9mm version of the Ruger 1022, and they said, "Give me that," and basically cleaned me up 9mm. And so I had to suffice myself with using the 22, and they literally ran me dry of ammo. And they managed. Remember those medals made up a couple weeks ago with the first attempt at welding?
Yep.
They shot the small one so much that they actually broke it. And
No
it was
way.
like, yeah, the little loops I had on the top corners, they actually shot them right off. And I was like, oh, I guess I'll be drilling holes in now. So that's that.
And
So that was pretty much
weld
it.
new ones back on.
Yeah.
Well, I think they weren't as tough as I would have liked them to be. So I think I'll just drill holes through them and get a chain link through and take it from there.
That also works.
Yeah. So that was pretty much it for me.
That's a lot that has happened.
Yeah.
It was a busy couple weeks.
Yep. Yeah, it's been at least a couple weeks since our last episode, right? So lots to catch up on. Maybe we'll move into the main topic. Let's see here.
All right, we got lots to cover.
Lots.
Well, yeah. Full disclosure, today I'm the dumb question guy. Like, I know nothing about locksmithing or lockpicking. So, if I do have a question for you guys, feel free to talk over me and just ignore me or whatever.
I've been waiting for the day that you've given me permission to do that.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
So quick story. I've been doing this a really long time. Longer than I care to admit. I had a customer call me. Now this says last week in the show notes, but it was really 2 weeks ago because of the delay. Customer called me is an old friend. I've been working with him for years and years and years, and he called me about 7 o'clock on a Friday night. Always opens his garage from the app on his phone. It's a connected house, and pulls up in his driveway, opens an app on his phone, presses the button, it opens his garage door, and then he can walk into his house. The internet service in that particular neighborhood had been down for the day. And so he had to get in to do things, did not have a key to his house, did not have any other way to get into his house other than this app that relied on internet service to make it happen. I showed up, opened the door in about a minute and a half, and he just had this dumbfounded look on his face, like, I've been waiting 5 hours to get it. It took me 20 minutes to get there, and about 95 seconds to open the door.
That's pretty sad. No backup plan for that guy, I guess.
Like
No backup plan for that.
Until it's not, right?
Exactly. So complementary redundancy was the lesson of that day.
Well, you got to think. I mean, if you lose power, it's nice to have an app on your phone, but it's not going to work, right? So,
Nope.
Wow.
Exactly. Well, the garage door opener wouldn't have worked had the power been out. So the internet was working or not, that door would have opened.
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe a good lesson for him. Maybe expound upon later on the joys of preparedness or something. But so, can you guys?
Well, I mean, that or he's just going to keep calling me and paying me to unlock his door. So,
job security, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can you guys give me as far as a rundown on the basic theory behind locksmithing and lockpicking? The
basic theory of lockpicking is that you want to mimic the action of the key. And I'm playing with some toys here. I'll show these off a little bit closer later. You want to mimic the action of the key inside the lock and take advantage of the manufacturer's tolerances. So in a perfect world, everything lines up exactly. The pins inside a lock are about 115 thousandths of an inch in diameter, and the holes that are drilled to accommodate those pins in a perfect world are about 117 thousandths of an inch. So there's not a lot of wiggle room. In reality, the drill wobbles a little bit. They drill the holes a little bit bigger to make things to have a lower failure rate. And so you can take advantage of that by manipulating the action, by manipulating the lock and mimicking the action of the key. That's your basic lock picking theory. Broader spectrum, basic locksmithing theory, when you're talking about gaining entry to a property, is you either want to mimic the action of the key or override the action of the lock. So if a lock has a very specific function, you can get around that somehow, then you can do that without causing damage in a lot of cases. And in many cases, you can do it without leaving any trace that you were ever there at all. And there are a million things that we could source. There are possibly tens of millions of videos on YouTube about how to open doors, how to pick locks. So we can cover kind of the basics here. There are a few later on in the show notes. There are a few people that we reference, but that's this is one of those things that's as much art as it is skill, and practice is the only way to do it well.
Is there any source for any kind of lockpicking tools that you suggest?
Sure, there are lots of sources. One, you can make them yourself. My first lock picks were ones that I made out of hacksaw blades and a Dremel tool. There are a few online retailers, including rapidsurvival.com. You can get some through there. There are a few basic tools that you want out there. They are, and for those of you who are following along on the YouTube channel, there's some show and tell. So the basic tools, that is a hook. You can kind of see it there. It's a bit of an upward swoop to that one. That's a diamond. Again, a bit of an upward swoop to that. This one's called a rake, and it's got a couple of different swoops to it, for lack of a more professional term. And the last thing you need is a tension wrench to actually turn the cylinder. And there are a million variables in all of those things. A lot of it comes down to preference. I've worked with locksmiths that have 350 different types of picks and tension wrenches and tools, gadgets, and I've worked with guys that carry 2 things tucked in their shirt pocket, and that's all they've ever used to open doors. And both of them are equally effective at getting into doors, getting into locks.
Yeah, I found when so I got started in I'm not a locksmith, so when I got started in lockpicking, it was actually probably 2 months ago now, and the way I came about it is I was watching YouTube videos, and there was this video that Otto played about lockpicking, and it was from the lockpicking lawyer, which if anyone's familiar with lockpicking, he's pretty popular on YouTube. And I started watching his videos, and I kind of got interested in it, and I kept watching more and more videos. And I basically decided to order a lockpicking kit off just the Chinese website. It was like $30, and similarly to what you just showed there, number of different lockpicks, like the hook, the diamond, the rake. Got some tensioning bars, and I found that over the course of a couple weeks, I was able to basically get through all of the padlocks I had in my house, the deadbolts I had in my house. And that led me to ordering more tensioning bars, like the ones that I had were just for the bottom of the keyway, so I ordered some for the top of the keyway when I needed to get into some more complicated locks like these American locks and some ABIS locks and everything. So at first, the locks I was trying to get through were like the master locks that have no security pins, so those were quite easy. And then when a few friends of mine that work in construction gave me some ABIS locks, some American locks, those became a lot tougher because they have security pins. And I'm sure anyone who's tried a lock pick and has come across security pins, either spools or serrated pins, knows that those are not easy to pick when you're not experienced, right? So,
well, it's in that case the concept behind those is sound, because what it does is it changes the feedback. It changes what you're feeling when you're picking the lock, and so you think that you've applied the right tension and you've got that pin set so that it's no longer in your way, and in reality it has jammed up partway through. So the basic theory, and I don't know how well you can see that. So this is a cutaway of a cylinder. So you can kind of see what's on the inside. This is the back of a standard lock cylinder. So right here, this is the plug. This is the part where the key goes in, and this here is the shell. And inside there are some springs that push down on the pins and hold them in place. And when there's no key in there, those pins are just all pushing down into the plug. When you put the correct key in like this, all those pins line up exactly along the top of the plug, which allows it to turn. And so that's the action we're trying to mimic when we pick locks. It's the idea that we're turning the when you're applying a little bit of turning pressure, lifting those pins up. Then the top pin is kind of resting on the edge of the plug, and then the bottom pin will drop back down out of the way. And when you've done that for all the pins in the lock will turn. So that's kind of the mechanics of it, and understanding how many pins there are, and which chambers or which holes are the most are the ones to do in which order. There's we could literally go on for months about that, but yeah. In basic, that's what we're after. That's kind of the action we're trying to mimic. And so with those serrated pins, it jams partway through, so it feels like it's set in the right place, but it's actually not. Or mushroom pins, where they have kind of a hollow partway through the top pins, and so you'll feel a little bit of a turn, which makes you feel like it's been set properly, but then it actually has not. So those are things that manufacturers do to try and overcome lockpicking as a challenge, or as an attack technique. But with a little bit of practice, you can feel it. You can compensate for it.
Yeah, I found when I ordered my lockpick set, it came with one of these locks, and I don't know if the camera can capture accurately. It's basically It's a practice lock, so it's an plastic acrylic lock. It still has a bronze core in it, but the beauty of it is that when you put your lockpick inside of this, you can see what the pins are doing in relation to what your pick is doing. So it basically, for me at least, it trained my mind and it trained my brain to understand visually what was happening inside the lock based on what my hands were feeling. And then when I moved from a practice lock like this one to an actual lock like this guy here, I was able to, my mind was able, or my brain was able to understand what was happening inside the lock based on what I was feeling on the pick. And some of these practice locks that I got were very cheap and didn't have any security pins in it. And other practice locks that I ordered actually had security pins in it. So some spools, some serrated pins. And that's really where I learned the most, was basically knowing when I've basically run into a serrated pin or a spool and what to do with it and how to properly set it. And I think the second thing I've learned that's been a really valuable lesson when it comes to lock picking, well, patience is one, but the second one is the ability to understand what you're up against when you see a lock. So if you see something like a master lock that you would buy at, your typical home hardware or Canadian Tire or anything, these are stores here in Canada, these things are really easy to overcome. I mean, I can get through most of the master locks in seconds, right? If I come across, a very expensive Abus discus lock, I know that I've got my work cut out for me, right? So being able to identify the level of skill and the types of tools required to get through that lock is the biggest thing for me, because when I started out, I looked at all padlocks as being the same, when in reality they're not. And you're going to have your really low end locks that most of the people use, and then you've got these really, really expensive locks on the other end of the spectrum. And in reality, sometimes you'll look at the padlock and you'll understand that it's way too much effort to get through that padlock when you could probably pop the hinges on the door in a matter of seconds, right? Yeah. So,
well, thanks for driving up my budget for locks around the house. But anyway, just circling around back to the beginning there, guys. I know, Alan, you kind of touched on it, but can you just give specify what each individual of those three tools, what they actually do to the lock?
They all serve basically the same function. So those are the three major ones there: the hook, the diamond, and the rake. What they do is within the lock, they lift the pins up. With the rake, you kind of push it in all the way and pull it back fairly quickly. And the idea of that is it's accuracy by saturation. If you do that enough times, it's the closest thing we get to fully automatic around here in fully automatic lock picking, where you just spray and pray. You pull that back a few times while you're applying tension, and you hope that it's the pins. Whereas the diamond and the hook, they're a little bit more finesse. Those are the sharpshooters, and they attack kind of one pin at a time, and you get really, really excellent feedback as to what it is. Between the diamond and the hook, most of that is personal preference. There are very few out there, very few brands of locks where there are long pins next to short pins, and that is represented by the depth of cut in the key. So if you can kind of see that, you can see how the keys are all the cuts are kind of at different lengths. So in order to line up inside the shell, all of those pins have to be of different lengths. So if you've got a long pin behind a short pin, or in front of a short pin, for example, you may need a different tool to attack that than if you've got a whole series of short pins together. And that again is it's all the feel. So if what you're feeling works well for you, then use that. I've always used the hook and the rake, because those are what I learned with, and those are what I'm comfortable with. Those are what I practiced on. Those are what I applied my trade with. That said, here's another set that I have that somebody sent me from across the pond, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are like seven or eight different kinds of picks in there, and they're all different designs and all different styles. And there's one in there I've never seen that before. That's kind of the second one from the left there, and it's got a really weird design to it. And the people that made that, again, they're UK based, and they said, it's something that they find is really useful there for that particular style of lock that's common in their geographic region. It's not something that we see here all that often, so it's probably not terribly useful for us.
I found also, like the lockpick set that I got had like 25 different picks in it, and I've tried them all, and I keep resorting to basically 3 picks. And that basically is one, is personal preference, and two, is the type of keyway you have to deal with. Because if you have a really difficult keyway, like a paracentric keyway, on some of the more expensive ABIS locks, I'm going to use those as an example, or Ablo lock, the keyway makes it quite difficult to get a pick in there, which is when you have to resort to, instead of using bottom of the keyway tension, you have to use top of the keyway tension in order to tension your lock. Yep, that's a good example there.
That's a keyway right there. So the keyway is the space cut out in the face of the lock that the key goes into. And based on the design of that, you'll see with these keys that there's a series of kind of cuts and grooves and shapes. And the key has to fit that keyway. And so there are a lot of ways to make that keyway more difficult to attack, which is again something that's been, it's the better mousetrap theory that's been going on for 180 some odd years, since Linus Yale Jr. first patented the pin tumbler lock back in the pre-Civil War days. But
so just well, one of the questions we haven't really touched on is the tension wrench. Can you just explain what the tension wrench is for?
So the tension wrench, yes, I can show you. So that's a tension wrench. That's one example of a tension wrench. This particular one is double-ended. It has a flat side and kind of a twisted side. And so what happens there is it just kind of sits, in this particular case, it sits right in the bottom of the keyway, and it is literally to just apply pressure sideways. And what happens there is when you apply pressure sideways, it allows, and then you lift the pins. It allows those pins to rest on top because those holes are sitting off center. And again, it relies on the inexactitude of manufacturing to put those holes off center. It allows for, it takes advantage of the fact that these are fairly soft metal. Most keys and cylinders are made out of brass or nickel silver, which have a tendency to wear over time, and so eventually you're going to end up with some sloppy tolerance that gives you a little bit of room to play. And so applying the right amount of tension applying too much tension will bind everything and you won't be able to move the pins at all. Applying tension, you won't be able to bind the pins at all because everything will just be sliding up and down normally. And applying the exact right amount of tension will bind the pins and make everything work.
That's a really good point, because I just want to touch on that for 1 second. So I'm just going to show on camera here. So the silver lock here is a Power Fist lock, which is, Princess Auto's home brand or house brand, and then this green lock here is an American lock. And I found that when I started lockpicking, I was applying the same amount of pressure on the more expensive, like, American locks as I was on the cheaper master locks. And really one of the biggest learning curves was what amount of pressure to apply to what type of lock. So for example, I found that the American locks require very little, like, feather touch pressure. So I'll use the top of the keyway tensioning bar, and I basically just apply my finger on it just to have a little bit of pressure. If I apply any more than that, I'm binding the cylinder and I will not get through it. And the first time I picked this green lock here, it took me over 2 hours to successfully pick it. Now I can pick it in probably less than a minute. But that's because I've picked this lock and I know the binding order, right? And that's another thing I wanted to mention too, is that sometimes now that I've gotten into lockpicking and I read up a lot about it and all that kind of stuff, I'll see things that bother me. And what I mean by that is I'll see keys that people have on their keychain that have a number on it. Sometimes that number refers to unique manufacturing codes. Other time it refers to basically the bidding order on the key. So the bidding order is exactly what he's showing there.
I don't know if you can see that on there, but so this is a factory printed key, and that is exactly what's on there. And this particular one says 44363. Yeah, this is a Schlage key. So 44363 refers to the depth of the cuts, and so every manufacturer out there has their own standards for depth. So with Schlage, their standards are 15 thousandths of an inch increments. Starts out at 250 thousandths is a full key blank, and then a cut number 4 would be 60 thousandths of an inch taken off.
Because
they go in those increments.
Where I'm going with that is that, if I'm trying to get through a lock, I'm going to try to do it. I mean, I can do it in a destructive fashion, which I do a lot in the fire department because we don't, we just have to get through it as quickly as possible. I can do it in a non-destructive fashion, which is where I'm learning to lockpick. And then I could do it with the least amount of effort possible. So if I'm sitting at a table with you and I can read the bidding order on that key, I can go back and duplicate that key just without having the key physically in my hand. As long as I know the bidding order, I can duplicate the key, and then I don't have to lockpick the lock. I can just put a key in and I'm in, right? So it's those types of things that I've noticed and that I've begun to understand as I get more into lockpicking. And there's other things as well. Like I bought a set of padlock shims on eBay for $1. I got 10 shims for $1. And a lot of the cheap locks that don't use ball bearing locking mechanism can actually be shimmed open. So why would I pick the lock when I can shim it open in 2 seconds, right?
And you can also make those out of pop cans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
like once you know that pattern, it's a pair of shears and a pop can, and you can make those. Back to that key printing thing.
Yeah.
I've actually done that on many occasions. What I've done is I've had somebody take a picture of both sides of the key, and I can create a key from that just by because I know this dimension here at the top, and I can and because I know what the increments are, I can average from this dimension to this spot. I can use landmarks on a picture, and I can actually recreate a key just by a picture, make a new one.
And I mean, all you need, because these keys are made out of brass, is all that you need is a file and a set of calipers to measure the depth that you're cutting at, right?
Yeah.
And even, I mean, a set of calipers is not really necessary because, again, I mean, there is some sloppiness built into these locks, right? So you may have to to file it down, try it in the lock, and file it down again, but it's totally doable. And then we can get into bump keys as well. I mean, some locks are bump proof, but most of them you insert a bump key and you hit it with a hammer and it basically opens, right? So
yep. And it relies on the again, the same concept that you're lifting all those pins up high and turning the mechanism, and then as you're doing that, as you're applying that turning pressure, the bottom pins are going to drop back down and trap the top pins. And it can be, especially in a well-worn lock, that can be a very effective way to open a door quickly.
Yeah. One more thing I want to mention too is if you know and study locks, so obviously if you're a locksmith or if you're into lock picking, you can study locks, and the vulnerabilities and exploits for certain popular locks are all on the internet. So there's certain locks made by some companies that have a fault where basically you can use a tool called a comb, and you basically put it into the keyway and you push up, and it basically pushes all of the pins above the shear line. And by doing so, you can rotate the cylinder. So this is a way that you can basically pick the lock without actually picking the pins one by one. You basically push them all above the shear line, and that's it. So
just cram them all the way up out of the shell. Yep.
Yeah. So once you
like this,
once you understand what locks have what types of vulnerabilities, you don't necessarily have to pick that lock. You can exploit the known vulnerabilities in that lock, right? So.
And there's even some at that point, right?
There's even some cheap locks coming from China that have a laminated steel body and a plastic core in it. So all you got to do is stick a screwdriver in there, turn it, and you overcome the core, right? So if you know what you're looking for, it's really easy to overcome these padlocks. And I was actually amazed and kind of scared at the ease at which somebody like myself, average Joe Blow, can pick up this skill and pick up a set of tools for next to nothing. And within a few weeks, I was literally picking, a $60 deadbolt on my house that I thought was secure, when in reality it's not. It's to keep honest people out, and that's it.
So talking about average there and lockpicking and such, what are the legalities of lockpicking?
Well, the legalities, and I'll full disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer.
None of us are.
Here is a lawyer.
Do you play one on TV?
I have in fact played one on TV, and if you can find it on YouTube, bonus points for you. The legalities are if you are using a tool inappropriately, you are guilty of an offense. That also applies to having a screwdriver. that applies to having a spark plug, right? A spark plug can go through a window pretty darn quickly. So it's all about intent to use. There are, as far as I'm aware in Canada, I can say for sure in Ontario, but as far as I'm aware across Canada, there are no restrictions on owning lockpicks. There are no restrictions on carrying lockpicks until you use them to access a property to which you are not authorized. Then you're now breaking and entering, you are now trespassing, you're now doing all of those things.
You're in possession of
but
break and enter tools.
Possession of break and enter tools, all of those things. But until you do that illegal thing with them, you're not breaking any laws.
Yeah, and I can confirm as well. I mean, I looked into it, at least from a standpoint on the East Coast of Canada. It's the same thing. So there's no restrictions or laws or anything on owning or carrying lockpicks. I know that some places in the United States you need to be a licensed locksmith in order to carry these, or something like a first responder in order to have them in your vehicle. But there's no such thing in Canada. And again, it's just based on, I can pick my own locks all day because I own them. I own this property, but I can't go to my neighbor's house and pick his locks because, I mean, it'd basically be the same thing as kicking his front door, right? So
yeah. I will throw the typical disclaimer in there is if you do have lockpicks on you and you do end up getting arrested, do not come and say to the judge that you're on the Canadian Prepper podcast, you can possess them. Because we're not giving out any legal advice, that's for sure.
No,
yeah,
absolutely.
I have a follow-up question to that one, guys. Then, just out of curiosity, like, what's the provincial regulator or federal regulator? Is it like a government department that actually covers this sort of stuff at all? Like, where would I look to see if it's like legal to own and all that stuff? Like, is there?
Well, in most of Canada, I believe Alberta is the only province that has any registration of locksmiths at all. Everywhere else, anybody can call themselves a locksmith, and it's the free market. It's the free market that decides whether you actually are or not. So it's covered by the criminal code under breaking and entering and possession of break and enter tools and all of those things. So as far as I'm aware, the only place that actually regulates that is the criminal code. So there's no, you would have to contact your local police department. Now, when as a professional locksmith, I spoke with my local police department a few years ago, and I said, so what? And the question I posed to them was, if somebody hires me to open the door, and I look at their driver's license and it says that they live there, and I open the door for them, and turns out that has been falsified, what is my liability there? And about 4 days and 3 superintendents later, they said, So basically, it's going to have to go to court to determine whether or not you've actually done something wrong. If you are acting on good faith, that somebody actually has the right to hire you to do that. So there's a fair bit of good faith that happens with that. Now that's something that's kind of Canada based. It used to be, and I don't know if it still is. It used to be in Russia that the only people that could possess lockpicks were the military. And therefore, if you locked yourself out of your house, it literally took the army to get you back into that house. I don't know if that's still the case, but that was up until a couple of years ago. It was Russia. The army were the only people that could carry lockpicks. So thankfully,
they will take good care of you, comrade.
Yes.
If I can mention though. So one thing with lockpicking as well, and again, I haven't gotten into the point where I can do locksmithing stuff. Like I can take cores out of locks, I can take them apart to see what type of pins are in there, but I've never actually rekeyed a lock or anything like that. I don't have the tools or the supplies needed to do that. I want to do it. I think that's the next thing I actually want to do. But one thing I've noticed where it was so easy to pick through my deadbolts is I've decided to add an extra layer of security. So for example, I have 3 entry doors here on my house, and on the back door, I replaced the deadbolt with a one-sided deadbolt. And what that is basically you have the actuator inside, but then there's just a steel plate on the outside. So that means that somebody can't pick their way through that back door. On the garage door, I have an implement that basically locks the door from the inside, like a night latch almost. So even if somebody were to pick that deadbolt from the outside, the door will still not open. Now, somebody could perceivably kick their way through the house, and that's fine, because if they're going to use a destructive method to get through the house, they're going to find a way to get through the house. But to stop a a lockpick from getting into the house, I've left them with one option now, which is my front door, which faces the road, which has illumination. There's a camera on it. So those things are going to dissuade most people from trying to get in using non-destructive method on that lock. And the doors that are not exposed to the road or traffic.
Well, it takes away the stealth option.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the thing is that back door, that back door, I mean, you can't pick it now, but there's a giant pane of glass that if somebody wanted to throw a rock through it, they could, and then just open it up. But I mean, then there's a security system that you have to deal with, and then you've got the fact that I'm home most of the time, and you know, the difference between a burglary and a home invasion is a pretty big step, right? So.
Well, and the big thing is that it leaves a trail, right? If there's a broken window, then you can, and there's something missing, then you know that somebody's been there.
Yeah.
If the lock has been picked, unless you actually take that lock apart and put those pins under a microscope, if you do that, you can generally tell that by the striations on the pins that a lockpick has been used, but that won't tell you whether it was actually effective or not. And unless you're getting into serious forensics, which you're not going to do for an average, for the average Joe, you're never going to know whether or not a lockpick was used.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole allure of it, is being able to get through a lock without being known, right? And I mean, to me that's like a skill, because I mean, really what we're talking about is gaining entry to something, and you could do it in a destructive way or a non-destructive way, which is lock picking, right? So to me, this is why this skill is really, really, really important.
In the trade, we used to have a kind of a running joke that banks did not like it when we opened safe deposit boxes without drilling them open. Most banks required us under contract to drill the lock, and they wouldn't let us even try to pick it because they didn't want to create the illusion to their box holders that the lock could be opened without their key.
Oh yeah, because it's usually the dual key system or whatever, and they sell the safety aspect or sell the security aspect to the customers. So, but even then,
so I mean, the dual custody system only means you've got two locks to pick. It's not that big of a deal, right?
Exactly. I mean, it was just kind of one of those running jokes that if somebody lost their key and we had to go do that, most banks would not allow us to open the lock non-destructively. They made us destroy the lock and replace it.
Yeah, and then I wanted to add as well, like if you think about it, most of your average run-of-the-mill thieves are probably not professionals, right? So I mean, if you've got a $150 kryptonite lock on your bicycle, that's going to be way too much for your average person to get through as far as lockpicking goes, right? So I mean, I started with these types of padlocks here, the key and tumbler, and then the next one that I got, I haven't picked any yet, but I've got the tools on order to pick disc detainer locks. So those are like the expensive alloy locks that have these disc detainer cores in them. There's some really cheap knockoffs from China that people are typically able to get through in less than a minute. And then there's some alloy locks that people have not been able to get through yet because they're so, I mean, you don't get any feedback on these types of locks and all that kind of stuff, right? So
well, they don't have the pin and tumbler system like an average keyway does or an average cylinder does, and that's one of the benefits of that system is that it's not unpickable, but it's as close to unpickable as.
But the thing is that you're really stepping up the game, right? So there's not a lot of people out there that have the skill to pick any types of lock, right? There's not a lot of people that have the tools. And then you really, when you think about it, going from picking these traditional pin and tumbler locks to disc detainer locks is a big step, right? So you need specialized tools. Oftentimes you need to modify the tools based on if you're going to tension it from the top of the keyway or the bottom of the keyway. And you need more time. And that's the thing. I mean, I've been picking these master locks, some of them in as little as 3 or 4 seconds, and I sent some videos to some of you of me picking these in seconds. Whereas, a $200 alloy padlock, it takes people 5-6 minutes to pick these locks, which means that you're leaving a much longer signature of you standing there picking a lock. So, if I'm picking a lock in 3 seconds, it looks like I'm using a key. If I'm sitting there for 6 minutes, probably up to no good, right? So.
Yeah, and so it definitely slows somebody down. And I mean, the big thing about locks is you're trying to make your you're trying to make your getting into your home or your business or your property as unappealing as possible. Criminals, as a general rule, go for the easiest target. If you are not the easiest target, chances are good they're going to move on unless they want into your property. And if they want into your property, they're getting in no matter what you do.
Now, the other problem too is that, if you have somebody that knows what they're doing as far as lockpicking goes, and, if I come up to a shed and I see a $4 master lock, probably not that much in that shed, right? If I see a $200 abloy discus padlock on that shed, whatever you're protecting is probably worth more than $200 if you're going to put a $200 padlock on it, right?
Yeah.
So as a rule of thumb, putting a $150 bike lock on a $100 lock doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, it gives people the probably the presumption that there's something quite valuable behind that lock, when in reality, the guy might just be a lock aficionado and just really want to put an expensive lock on his shed to lock away some brooms and some rakes, right? So
camouflage.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So I know everybody is itching to know the answer to this next question. The stethoscope thing you see in movies all the time, on the old safes with the locksmith putting it up against and just listening for the clicks and the patterns. Does it actually happen?
Kinda. Not really, but kind of. It can be done. Actually, I had a safe come through my shop a few years ago. It was about it weighed about 600 pounds, and it was about 3 feet by 3 feet by about 4 feet high. We traced the design back to about 1922, and it was really cool. And it had been long abandoned, and yeah, with the stethoscope, I could hear the gates, the wheels inside turning, and I could hear the gates lining up. Now with safe locks, the dial locks, they work on a really different principle. It's still more by feel than by sound, and you can feel when they line up, because there's a spring that pushes a cam down on the surface of the gate, on the surface of the wheels, and then the wheels have gates, and then when all of those gates line up, the cam drops in and allows the door to open. It's a lot more by feel than it is by listening, but that doesn't make for very good TV when it's just a guy dialing the lock back and forth, and then it opens.
I knew that guy in Hogan's Heroes was full of crap then.
There's actually an episode of the A-Team, and I remember this episode rather vividly. There's an episode of the A-Team where they put a tape recorder in an envelope that they put in a safe, and then they got the tape recorder back, and they played back, and he said you can count the clicks, and that's how you can figure out the dial. Absolute malarkey. Not even a little bit. But it made for good TV.
I'll profess that I haven't done any of this with safes yet. I've just picked locks themselves, but I did see a video of somebody getting through a Sentry safe. So I mean, if you know the type of safe I'm talking about, you can buy them at like Staples or Costco. They're like $100 or $200. Electronic safe. You think that they're unbreachable, right? And they do have some security features on them that make it a little bit harder to get into. But in one of these videos, they basically took a rare earth magnet, put it up against the front of the safe, and moved the magnet, which basically moved the cam inside the door of the safe, and they were able to open the door. As easy as that.
So what that's doing is it's actually moving a solenoid inside. So that's solenoid is a little plunger around with an electromagnetic field around it. When you apply power to the electromagnet, it retracts or extends the solenoid. And what with Sentry safes, and that was Locksmith was that guy. He's based in Vancouver, actually. He's a pretty neat guy. I've spoken with him on many occasions. And what he did was he took that rare earth magnet, and it created a magnetic field stronger than the spring that was holding the solenoid in place. And then when he moved it, it retracted the solenoid and was able to open the door. Back in the bad old days, before when solenoids were fairly new, what we used to do was actually you would tip the safe back onto its back feet, apply tension to the handle, and when you dropped it, it would bounce on the spring. The solenoid would bounce on the springs inside, and you could just crack the door open doing that. So safes are a really interesting field. It's a whole subset of locksmithing. It's a whole specialty in and of itself. safecrackers are like the fighter pilots of locksmiths. They get to do all the really cool stuff.
Yeah, and then I want to.
they get all the glory in the movies, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, that's awesome. So, hey, guys, just for people like me that wanted to start learning the skill, like how would you guys recommend to start out, right? Just to get the basic knowledge and basic skills get going.
I'll tell you how I did it again. I mean, it's there's two main channels that I followed. It's Bosnian Bill on YouTube and the Lockpicking Lore. And between the both of them, they've got almost probably 1,500 or 2,000 videos picking almost every padlock you can imagine. So I find going through those videos and looking at how they basically examine a lock and how they go about attacking the lock, so to speak, gave me a lot of insight on how to get started. And then, like I said earlier, I went on some nondescript Chinese website, ordered a set of lock picks, and then I basically went through my house, gathered all the padlocks I could find. Most of them were garbage master locks, and I just basically sat on my sofa watching, Breaking Bad, reruns of Breaking Bad, and I sat there and I just picked my way through every single lock. And in a matter of about a week or so, I picked my way through every padlock, and I said, well, I'm going to attack the deadbolt. So, and then I think also getting an understanding of how the actual pins work in relation to the cylinder knock and stuff, which is why something like this, like these locks here, these acrylic locks, are a really good learning tool. And you're only going to use these for a few days, because once you get an understanding of what your pick does within a cylinder and how it moves the pins and all that kind of stuff, then you can move on to the real deal. And it's really quick to pick up as far as the skills goes. And it's all fun and games until you hit those security pins, and that's when it starts to get a little bit harder.
I started out with these guys. So they start out, there's little numbers. I don't know if you can see them on the camera there. This one says 2. And I got this one here. It says 3. And then I got 4 and 5 as well. And that's the number of pins that are actually in the lock.
Oh,
so
yeah. Okay.
Cool. So I know this one I've only got 2 pins to play with, but I can start with that and I can start feeling the reaction on the pins. And then I can, once I get that number 2 figured out, I move on to number 3, and you get the feel for moving 3 pins around, etc. And I found that helped out quite significantly with at least knowing ahead of time how many pins I was dealing with and getting the feel for the lock and how it operates.
So you guys talk about all these like 2-pin, 3-pin, 4-pin types. Like, when we actually look at a deadbolt or a padlock or whatever, how do we actually know what type of lock we're looking at?
So, I mean, you can, if you can see the key, you can look at the bidding order and you can determine how many pins are in that lock, right? Typically, by experience now, like I know, I know most of the padlocks. I can tell how not tell, but I know from experience how many pins that they have in each one of these locks, right? But if you don't know, what you do is you basically stick your pick inside the tumbler, go to the very end, and then start counting your way back, and you can count the actual number of pins in there, so you know how many pins that you've actually got to deal with, and you just basically just count them. Yeah.
So a couple of points to add. If you're an old school guy like me, do a Google search for the MIT lockpicking guide. So that is the MIT as in the university in Massachusetts. They have an entire lockpicking team. They have guidelines. There's a lot of, it's an older document. I want to say it's like a mid-90s document, but it's excellent for understanding the theory of how locks work and how the picks are able to overcome a lock. So that's a good one to have, kind of a good document to learn from. And when it comes time to finding locks to pick, there are a million online sources, but also go down to your local Habitat for Humanity restore if you have one in your area. They often have old locks kicking around that you can practice with, and also the hit up your local yard sales. You can find locks that are not, they haven't been altered or manipulated. They've just been used a little bit, taken off the door. There are hardware suppliers around, like hardware stores or millwork suppliers, and they'll have old discontinued locks that they'll sell you pretty cheap. I know the one place that I've been to recently had a whole skid of old keyed knobs on sale for $10 each, and they're brand new in the box. They're just dead stock, so they move them out pretty quick. So there's lots of opportunity to find cheap locks out there to practice on.
I'll throw one last source in, and this is where I got a lot of these locks. So this is an American lock. I've got some other ones here that are ABIS and whatnot. I went to a friend of mine who works for a local construction company, and they have a lot of construction sites that they lock up with padlocks. And I said, do you guys have any padlocks that you've lost the keys for that you can't use anymore? And he says, oh my God, do I ever? He gave me a box of locks. There was about 30 locks in it, and most of them were like the American lock and the ABIS. These are locks that are worth 20, 30, 40 bucks each. And the beauty of it is that although I don't have the key for it, if I can pick this lock, I can remove the core and rekey the lock, or because I haven't done any rekeying, I can drop a new core in it with a key. So as long as I can pick it, I can change the core or rekey it, and then I can turn this in from basically a piece of garbage that can be used to a $30 functioning padlock. And I said to him, if I can get these fixed up, do you want the locks back? And he's like, no, you keep them, you play with them and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, all right. So my next step as I'm picking these is to get my hands on some new cores with keys, so I can basically drop the new cores in these locks. And then I think eventually what I'd like to do is get into more of the locksmithing side, which is basically once I pick it, I can take the core out and I can change the pins myself and get the keys and go with that. But yeah, if you go to your
and then sell your construction friend all new padlocks. They're all key to like, so you can make them all, put them all on the same key, and then you won't have that problem anymore.
There you go. Yeah,
that's right.
A lot of construction companies I work with. Yep.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut in there, but just those electronic lockpicks that kind of like have vibrate back and forth, or whatever, kind of like what do you call them, a pick gun or whatever.
So this is an example of a pick gun. They can be. I find that people who learn with these, this is a manual pick gun, and I don't know if you'll be able to see that it happens pretty quick, but if you watch kind of right here, when I do that, it kind of drops down and hits up at the same time. So that's kind of the manual version of that. The electronic version of that just does the same thing for you. It's essentially a manual toothbrush is what it is. I find when people learn with those, they use them as a crutch. It can be a lot faster than using manual lockpicks. Again, you're relying on brute force. It's spray and pray lockpicking, which is a term that I just coined earlier tonight, and I'm really proud of it. But it certainly does the job. They're certainly effective. A great way to open a lock in a hurry. I know whenever I've done work with bailiffs and sheriffs and police before, they care more about getting through the door quickly than they care about how pretty the job is. And so that's a tool that certainly will open the door fast. But again, it makes a little bit more noise. It takes, again, it's like anything. It's like any tool. It takes a little bit of skill and a little bit of knowledge to make it work. But once it does, it's certainly a functional piece of kit.
And also to me, like, I don't have a pick gun, but I do have some rakes that came in my kit. And I was able to rake open a lot of the cheap padlocks. And although it's neat that I know how to do it, I'm more into it for the art of actually picking the locks pin by pin, right? So I mean, I can stick a rake in there and I'm through in like 3 seconds, but I'd rather do it manually the old school way and understand what each pin is doing. But that's just me. But again,
there's a time and a place for that, right? There've been many occasions where I've had a sheriff standing over my shoulder, and he says, if I tap you on your right side, you're going down that direction, because if this door opens and the person decides that they're going to come out all of a sudden, if you're on your knees in front of the door, you don't have a whole lot of option for defensive action there. So very distinct memories of one particular instance where I was standing in a 3-story walk up, and I was kind of on the landing and the opening the door, and there was a cop standing on one side of me, a cop standing on the other. And I'm not a small person by any means, and both of these two were they were tiny. Both of them could have fit inside the same space that my body occupies. And they said, well, if this guy opens the door, I guess he had warrants and they were called out for a wellness check and they couldn't get the door open, so they called me, and they said, if this door opens, dive out of the way. I said, that's cool, but there's stairs on both sides. So I'm throwing myself down the stairs, and then what? Like, both of you are half the size of me, and then what? He was not he was not cooperative when I finally did get the door open, but he didn't think that I was actually going to get it open, so he was not aggressive about it. But it was just one of those instances like where getting through the door fast is sometimes more important than getting through the door in a pretty or non-destructive manner. And that, of course, brings us to the very last tool I have in my kit. I wouldn't say the very last, but it's kind of a last resort, and I may not actually have an example here. So I just got my little kit that's in my car. That's sometimes the easiest thing to do is just put a 3/8" drill on the face of it and just be aggressive. I've always said there's no door that is impenetrable. It all depends on the amount of violence you're willing to apply.
What's funny, I was gonna mention that as well, is that you can pick your way through a lock, or one of the things I've seen on a lot of these YouTube channels is they use something called a ram set. I don't know if you guys have heard about this before, but it's a ram set gun. You get them for about $100 on Amazon or from Home Hardware, Home Depot, and all it is it uses a blank 22 caliber cartridge, and there's basically a hardened steel piston inside that basically forces that piston out. And typically these are used to basically set nails into concrete or structural steel. But if you don't put a nail in it, the piston protrudes from the ram set, and basically it's defeating almost every lock it comes up against, because you're basically shooting the lock. Instead of using a bullet, you're using a solid hardened steel piston. And I mean, on these channels, they've basically used this ram set and 122 blank to get through an $80 padlock just as quickly as that. I mean, this leaves a big signature. I mean, again, it's a gunshot, right? So if you're trying to do this at 2 o'clock in the morning when there's security outside, this is not the way to do it. But if you want to do it quick and dirty, that's another way to do it.
It's certainly a way to do it. And that's another entity unto itself is forcible entry and getting through the door quickly. And there's a time and a place for that too. I mean, as a first responder, I don't carry lockpicks, but I carry axes and rams and pallet tools and all kinds of things, all kinds of big, heavy, ugly things that are designed to get me through the door when I want to get through the door. But I'm leaving a trace that I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
Where this is a really useful skill is when leaving no trace is the best thing. The challenge of breaking a door open with a Halligan or a ram is that you can't lock the door behind you afterwards.
Or you don't care to do it.
or you don't care to. If that's not part of your plan, then that's okay.
Yeah.
If you remember if you go back to like season 2 or 3 of The Walking Dead, when they're just kind of on the run and they're kind of running from house to house, but they keep smashing doors open to get through. If they had taken the time to pick the lock, they could have locked the door behind them and bought themselves a little bit more time.
Yeah, and I'll mention too as well. I mean, this is coming from my 9 or 10 years in the fire service now. Is try before you pry, right?
Oh,
I can't
absolutely.
I cannot tell you. And I'll use an example that happened 2 years ago. So there was this really nice house. I'm talking almost $1 million house. And we got there because there was reports of a smoke condition within the home. I did a 360 around the home. I saw smoke in the kitchen. The homeowners weren't home, so I gave my guys the go-ahead. And the front entryway on this house was probably $15,000 to $20,000. I'm talking stained glass and everything, right? So the guys, my guys did what I told them to do, and they took a Halligan and an axe, and they got through this front entryway pretty quickly. Turns out that the door was unlocked. So, and it turns out that the smoke condition in the house is basically just a smoldering box of cereal on the stove. There's actually no fire or anything. So we didn't have to put anything out. We used positive pressure to vent the house of the smoke. The only damage there was basically the insurance having to replace a $20,000 front entryway, because we destroyed the door, we destroyed the stained glass around it, we destroyed the frame, when we could have just turn the doorknob and open the door.
That's probably a little awkward conversation afterwards, I'm sure.
I'm telling you right now, coming from my days in the military police as well, is you have to size up what you're going up against, right? And this is like a lot of commercial doors are outward swinging, right? So before you push on a door, try to pull on it. Look at how the door works, and before you do something, understand how it works and try that first. So before you push on it, and I've done this before, I'm searching an area, and I come across the door, and instead of pulling on it, I push on it and I hear click, which means I just latched it, when now I'm screwed because now I can't get into that building, right? So I did that as a big rookie mistake. So you just really have to use your brain, and you have to size up what you're going up against. And that's the biggest thing with these padlocks as well, is sizing up the padlock to understand what you're going to be up against, as far as, what type of core is in there, how many pins are there, are there security pins, can you shim this lock, or if you need to get it through it quickly, are you going to use something like a cordless angle grinder with an abrasive wheel, and it's going to get through this lock in 10 seconds, right? So,
or if the lock itself is the strong point, then most padlocks are attached to chains, which can be cut with bolt cutters. They're attached to a hasp and staple, which can literally just be pried off the door.
Well, yeah,
in a lot of cases. So.
That's just it. I mean, even here, I've got a shed that basically has, a relatively moderate lock on it, but basically the hasp has, like 3/4 inch screws into pine, which is a softwood. So, you could take a pipe wrench and twist the lock, and it's going to basically rip the hasp off the door, right? So you've got to think about, if somebody wanted to get through it in a hurry, are they going to go through the bother of lockpicking, or are they just going to take a pipe wrench and just twist it off, right? So
I think from a preparedness perspective, there's going to be a time to be quiet and a time to be like destructive, loud, and quick too, right?
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
So just because I know I'm going to have to stop you guys, yes, we're going to go on for like 3 hours on this one, but
It's only the first episode again.
Yeah, for a good intro for lockpicking, this has been a good one. But I got some dumb questions I wrote down here just because I was, kind of trying to follow along with you guys, and you guys are going way over my head a bunch. What are shims?
So I wish I had them here with me, but basically shims are just really thin pieces of metal. I'm talking like thousandths of an inch, that you can slip through, and I'll actually get a lock here. So this is an ABIS lock, and you see where basically the hasp goes into the body. If there's any tolerance there whatsoever, what you can do is you could basically put in a piece of steel, I guess thin piece of sheet metal in there, and basically shim the lock open. So if it uses, and I don't know the correct terminology for it, but if he uses like a ball bearing mechanism, you're not going to be able to shim it. But if he uses the typical, the dogs, I'll call them, then you could basically slip that piece of metal in there. It pushes the dog out of the way, and then you can basically pop that hasp open.
Okay.
So yeah, a shim essentially it separates two sections of a lock. So whether it's a padlock that uses those dogs, like you said. So a dog is essentially, if you think of everybody who is any kind of a prepper has read like an outdoor survival guide, and if you think of that, think of the trigger mechanism for a snare, where you've got kind of a 45 and a 90-degree angle, and it fits in kind of like that on a big scale. This part here would be spring-loaded. This part here is on the shackle, and a shim is a very thin piece of metal. Think about the thickness of a pop can. That would slip in between those, because this part's spring-loaded, pushes that out of the way, and then it allows the shackle to move freely. You can also do that with a whole bunch of different types of locks, depending on what you have access to, like what part of the lock you can see. But those, yeah, absolutely. So a shim, and there are a million websites and a million YouTube videos out there that show them. But grab a pop can and some tin snips, and you can go to town and make a whole ton of them yourself. And they can be very effective and very quick.
Okay, so next prepper related question: are all handcuff keys keyed the same?
All NIJ, so National Institute of Justice, all NIJ certified handcuffs are all the same, whether it's Peerless, Smith & Wesson, whatever they are. The fuzzy cuffs that you may or may not have hanging in your bedside table are generally not the same, and there are.
What has she been telling you?
What you don't know when you travel, Ian.
Oh, I tell you.
Oh boy, here we go. Here we go.
No, but those fuzzy handcuff, like those fuzzy play handcuffs, are generally not the same mechanism as a police or security or corrections handcuff. There are a few out there. There are a few brands of handcuffs out there that actually use a full pin and tumbler key. But handcuffs in general are designed to reduce resistance rather than stop somebody from escaping. So they're fairly easy to bypass once you understand the mechanism behind them.
Yeah, and you can shim those as well because of the ratcheting mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Now, in order
so
to do so, you'd have to be left to your own devices, and whoever put you in handcuffs in the first place is not staring at you while you're trying to do this, right? But
or you have to be Samuel L. Jackson in Die Hard 3, because that was pretty badass when he like took that piece of wire out, when Bruce Willis took that piece of wire out of his shoulder and like. But that's basically what he did. Was he took a piece of wire that ended up looking something like
handcuff key
that, which is pretty small, and just pressing it between the latching mechanism to bypass it. And it's actually the same motion, just for the record, the same motion as is going to end up in our podcast challenge. So stay tuned for that part. Just a little tidbit there.
I know skeleton key term is pretty outdated, and that's what they used to use in the old days and stuff with the big old locks. But do like each manufacturer, do they have like a kind of a master key that kind of opens their locks generally? Like hotels have like a master key in the old school versions before they went electronic. But is a skeleton key still a thing?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So a skeleton key, or what we would traditionally call a skeleton key, was essentially taking advantage of a limitation of that lock. So back before the pin tumbler system, which is what we see today, this is a pin tumbler lock. There are pins in the top, or springs in the top, pins in the bottom. They work together. Before that system was popular, they used what was called a warded system, and a ward was essentially an obstruction in the keyway. So you would have generally you would have a key would have a hole in the end of it that would fit on a post, and a blade that would rotate around, and the obstruction within the lock would determine whether that key would turn or not. And so if you had a key that bypassed all of those obstructions, then that's what we would typically refer to as a skeleton key.
So like
there are still some in circulation. So some master padlocks that kind of look like for lack of a better description, they kind of look like a fishbone, where they have a series of cuts kind of up both sides. That's a warded padlock, and if you cut away all of those things except for the very tip, you can actually put that in any one of that style of master padlock and rotate the key.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
and then what hotels use and what a lot of commercial facilities use is a master key system. So that looks like it's a standard pin tumbler key, just like this, but it's a standard pin key. But then it uses a different type of pin inside the lock, and takes advantage of the fact that those cuts are all on standard locations, and so you can plan your keys at standard cuts and a series of progressions, and put the correct pins in place to allow more than one key to open the door. And that can get super complicated. That's an entire week. That's actually a week-long course in and of itself. But fun fact, both World Trade Center towers, when they were still standing, could all be open. Every door within both of those towers could be opened with one key.
Okay, so I think I got 3 questions left. We'll try and run through these quickly before we get too long here. So tell me about Locksport. We mentioned it a couple of episodes ago. Is Locksport kind of a widespread thing? Is it worth getting into? Anything?
It's certainly a thing. I honestly can't tell you how big a thing it is. I know, 10 years ago it was kind of growing as a competitive thing. So Locksport in general is groups of people, not unlike Hughes, who pick locks for fun rather than for profit, and you can turn it into a competition. There's a video going around out there of a guy who actually made a working key. So Hughes mentioned earlier about filing a key down to make it work, and you can do that by it's a process called impressioning, where you read the marks left on the key by running it in and turning it left and right. And he actually makes a working key for that lock in about 65 seconds or 75 seconds, which is just unbelievably fast. Like I can't even find my lock picks at 3 a.m. in 75 seconds. And this guy's making a functional lock, functional key for that door, it's really cool. And there's some people who do that for fun. That's all they do. And they do really well at it. And is it worth getting into? If it's something that you enjoy, go for it. I'm not one to say don't do something like that. I will caution you though that if your experience in lock picking is limited to a well-lit, climate-controlled environment when you've got a coffee beside you and you've got a lock in a vise on a table, that's not necessarily that skill is not necessarily indicative of your ability to pick a lock under duress in the middle of the night when it's raining and it's -30 and you can't feel your fingers. So in terms of practical application, it's a good primer, but nothing takes the place of actually doing it for real.
Cool. So I guess barring like going out and get certified as a locksmith and going through a big apprenticeship program, is there a faster course available? Just like you get something more than YouTube, but less than a job, but kind of get better hands-on instruction?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a whole bunch of correspondence schools. The one that I went through when I was young and foolish actually no longer exists. They shut down their locksmith program, which is unfortunate because it was fairly thorough. I think I still have all their books. Even it was a great program. There are a couple of great resources out there. There's an author. His name is Bill Phillips. So if you Google that, you'll find. I think I bought that book on Amazon back when Amazon actually just sold books. That's how long ago that was. I think my edition is the 6th edition of the complete book of locks and locksmithing. He's probably up to edition 8 or 9 by now, I would imagine. But that's an excellent resource for theory. That's a textbook that's used in a lot of hands-on classes. You can join your local association. In Ontario, it's the Association of Ontario Locksmiths, and they have a lot of courses that you're welcome to take, which gives you lots of hands-on, whether you actually pursue it or not. Or there are still a few correspondence courses out there that will, they'll send you supplies, and I think you're probably expecting to pay about $500 for that course, and it wouldn't necessarily be enough to get you a job as a locksmith, but it would certainly get you a lot more knowledge than just the guy walking in off the street. I've also talked about at length running a class. So I see a whole bunch of comments on YouTube right now. So keep up that. Those are some great questions. But if there's interest out there in the Canadian Prepper podcast community, I would be more than happy to put on a hands-on class. We could do a 1 or 2 day. Here's how locks work and here's how to bypass them. I'd do that for kicks in the fall.
Oh, so I forgot to start watching the YouTube content. I was supposed to get Trash Talk tonight on there. Oh, Jesus, should have been watching. I'd be interested in that. If you're going to run it in the wintertime, for sure, I'd be interested in traveling down there and taking the course for sure.
Yeah, so we could do that. That would be if there's if we get at least 5 or 6 people involved, that would be that's always a good time. That would be a great excuse for us to all kind of get together and have a little meetup and then take away some really practical skills as a result. So
be good.
Send us an email, feedback@prepperpodcast.ca, and if you're interested, and we'll get an email list going, and we'll see if we can figure that out for sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Oh, I see. I did get my trash talking already. So alternate location, indeed. Yes, I can't give up too much OPSEC here, so I have to go to alternate location tonight. So
it's actually the same place. He just hung a sheet. So it looks like he's traveling.
I got rid of the sleeping bag from the last episode. I think it was behind me. Now it's just a gray wall. So I just be on their toes. That's what it is. Cool. So I guess it leads us towards the podcast challenge, doesn't it?
Sure does.
All right. So I just put in there. I didn't have much to say because I have no knowledge of lockpicking other than opening a bathroom door with the inside of a pen. That was back in the day when, I thought it was really cool doing that. But so I actually did some research on that, and I just thought I'd grab one of the videos from Matt McClatchey from Slamfire, and he had a great little thing on lockpicking a combination gun lock with a precision screwdriver. I thought it was kind of neat because preparedness people usually have trigger locks around the house, and if they for some reason don't have the combination or whatever and want to get one off quickly, it was a neat little lockpicking video, maybe like a minute and a half long. And I figured if anybody's interested, maybe just watch the video, see if it piques your interest, and maybe it might raise awareness or make you want to get into it. And if you enjoy it, maybe know how lockpickers feel.
Yeah.
It's the same technique to open that style, that kind of ratcheting style of gun lock, as to open handcuffs.
Oh, well, there you go. Even
Yeah.
more.
So you get two skills in one. Yep.
Awesome. And let's see. I guess we'll move into episode closing and some upcoming events. So we've still got the annual Preppers Meet in Desboro, Ontario, happening July the 11th to the 14th. So if you check out annualpreppersmeet.com, grab your tickets. They usually sell out pretty quick. Just a reminder as well to anybody who is planning on attending, if you do register on site or you plan on making some purchases from the various vendors that are present there, there is no cell service. Therefore, there are no debit machines or credit machines. Everything there is all cash. So just keep that in mind if you do come out and you're looking to buy a few things.
But will they take silver and gold?
Oh, you'll have to work that out with the
we're a
various.
bunch of preppers, right?
Yeah, ammunition is a barter. Why not?
They do have a time during the meet where it's a gear swap. So you can swap out certain gear that you've got for other gear and talk to other people and look at what they have and what they're looking to give up. And you can swap stuff back and forth as well. They've got that posted on the site, but they've been pushing pretty hard on the advertisements recently that it's cash only. I know from years previous that I've attended that I've tried to bring my debit machine with me because I've done a vendor booth with them. It doesn't work very well. So the push for cash only is pretty good because the cell signal there is next to none. So just keep that in mind if you're coming out. And again, it's July 11th to the 14th and annualpreppersmeet.com. And they're on Facebook as well if you want to check them out.
Awesome. I've got a podcaster charity shoot coming up July 6th in Drumheller, Alberta. So everyone is welcome. You don't have to be a podcaster to show up there and participate at all. So interestingly enough, on the 5th of July, the day before, there's what they call a Mapleseed course, which is you're welcome to show up just with a 22 and a scope, basically, and it teaches you some basics of marksmanship. Or if you're a experienced shooter, you can actually shoot for a qualification they call rifleman, or I think even there's an expert qualification. It's just a fun way to get to know some local people and stuff like that. But also on July 6th, the day of the charity shoot itself, there's a Stop the Bleed course being held by Gavin from a Canadian Patriot podcast. So that's basically Stop the Bleed involves active shooter situations or anything else where you need to really prevent somebody from bleeding out. It should be an interesting course as well. I've signed up for that one myself. And
I did that a month or so ago, and it's a fantastic class. And it kind of came about because of active shooters. But if you think about it, the one example the trauma nurse in London here told me about was guy walking up his basement stairs with a beer in his hand, tripped. The beer bottle broke his fall, it lacerated his arm, and he ended up needing 4 or 5 surgeries to put it back together. So, I mean, those situations are probably a lot more common than we would like to admit, and it's certainly an excellent class to have under your belt.
Well, I was just thinking even a hunting or a camping accident, same thing. I mean, there's potential for bleeds there as well. So that's interesting. There's actually 2 courses for Stop the Bleed being held that day. Morning and afternoon, so you can do your shoot, you can do your Stop the Bleed course as well. That night there's going to be a pig roast, and actually there's probably going to be a impromptu podcast going on that night too, so stand by for that one. That's about it. So coming up July.
I put an event for the basic non-destructive course. It's something that I've been asked to do by a couple of different people, so I'll put together a few different ways to get through doors and locks. It's kind of geared towards first responders, but if as long as you're not a real jerk, I'm open to just about anybody. So we'll figure out where and when and all that good stuff. But if you're interested, yeah, definitely reach out and let us know, and we can confirm up some details and times and dates and stuff.
Awesome. Let's move into shout outs.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out my first locksmith mentor, Rob. He, I I got into the industry because I broke a lot of keys. So he took me on as an apprentice, taught me how to not break keys, and then taught me how to fix locks. He also got me into archery and got me into shooting all those years ago. So that's I don't know if he's listening, but Rob, if you are, thank you. I appreciate it, and the skill hasn't gone away.
That's about a quick shout out to everybody who's joining us on the live feeds. I've noticed over the last couple of episodes we're starting to get a base of people that are coming out and watching whenever we're on, and they're commenting, which makes things a little bit more fun for us as we're talking. We get a little bit of some live questions and some curveballs at times, and some beating up on Ian every once in a while too, as we saw today.
That's my favorite part.
Just a shout out to everybody who's logging in and watching us live. It definitely makes things
cool. So I've got a couple shout outs myself. Prepper Ryan for an awesome chat and exchange of ideas here. Funny story, actually, shout out to Owen from New Brunswick. Actually, I reached out to him as he's one of the original preparedness podcasters that I started listening to many years ago. And after we got chatting for a while in a typically small world Canadian experience, it turns out he actually chats with my uncle in New Brunswick that I haven't seen for years, more often than I do. So typical Canadian story, I guess, right? Like, Bob from New Brunswick. Yeah, he does. Yeah. So that was more funny than anything else. And it turns out he actually used to do martial arts with my cousin, which I haven't even seen my cousin since the 80s. So it's actually kind of funny. Other one for opposite reasons, I came him, but just a nod to one of our International Preppers Network people. He's busy fighting fires in Northern Alberta, doing public service. Appreciate that. And yes, she already threw some smack at me there already, but new listener Katrina, so she's watching for the first time tonight. So I appreciate her joining us.
Well, Katrina.
And then anything for you, Hughes?
I mean, I just, if we're going to go on the lockpicking theme, just shout out to the two channels that really got me into lockpicking. And, I don't usually pick up most of my skills through YouTube, but in this case, I did. So just shout out to Bosnian Bill and the Lockpicking Lawyer for letting me watch hours and hours and hours of YouTube videos on how to pick locks. And really, that's how I got my start in this. So thank you.
Awesome.
Well, it's nice that they don't charge for that knowledge too, right? Like, I mean, free knowledge is always a good thing.
100%. Yeah.
All right, we'll move into email and iTunes reviews. So I'll start out with the iTunes reviews. So from our last episode there, Barnskey has modified the 4-star review. So there's an addendum now. Glad that you got a chuckle. In all seriousness, great podcast. I've learned a lot from you all in just the short time you've been on the air. Even started my own mag. Would love to meet all you in person sometime. I'll keep my ear on the ground for the opportunity. Keep up with the good work. So we are back to just that one little guy, that one little 4-star there.
It's going to bug you for a while yet, isn't it?
I'm not going to stop now.
Yeah.
Appreciate you changing that one to a 5. It's great. We've got 21 5-stars. The one little guy 4-star. So yeah, keep the reviews coming in. It's much appreciated. As far as emails go, I'll just pull them up here. So we've got one from Carissa. It just says, hey guys, feeding the feedback inbox as you requested. Much appreciated because it's been dry for a bit. Super pleased to find you guys on iTunes. I've been into prepping for 14 years now. Listens to Survival Medicine Hour and our podcast, the only two that she actually subscribes to. So we much appreciate that. She's found, let's see here. If she could make one suggestion, it would be to avoid the assumption that all your listeners are anti-liberal. Okay.
Happily anti-politician. Does that count?
That works. So
as a prepper, you should be anti-politician in general, regardless of which direction you tend to lean. Yes.
She does, however, agree with their stance on gun ownership, but there are many other policy areas that influence my voting decisions, which is why we're allowed to vote, right? So,
yep,
exactly. It's all right. She says that we're doing a great job so far, so we appreciate that. And as far as show topics go, one I haven't seen covered a lot is surveillance and internet-based services. So if you're concerned with civil unrest, then you should also be concerned about the data collection and digital surveillance. Valid point.
That would explain that helicopter circling over my head all over my house all the time.
That explains why my my bandwidth on my internet kind of slows down whenever we start the podcast. I guess the government's watching.
The man's got to listen in, yeah.
Just remember that when something is free, you are the product. Anybody here pay for Gmail?
Yeah.
I read something really funny today too along that line of somebody saying I saved $50 a month by canceling my home alarm and flying some nefarious flags in front of my house, and now the RCMP watches my house for me. So
exactly.
Yeah, just throw out some bad YouTube videos, and before you know it, you have plenty of surveillance.
Yeah, you'll have a couple vans in front of your house. Yeah.
She finishes the email off here that I know that you've discussed the importance of cash a few times, but I think a discussion regarding internet dependence is also important. It's not wrong there. Absolutely. And I think we could do an episode.
That's a lesson for the whole world: is the internet dependence is becoming a thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Kind of pervasive.
We could certainly do an episode on internet security and some ways to kind of protect yourself online for sure. It's something we can add to the ever-growing list of topics. So we appreciate you sending that one in. We will add it to the list, and stay tuned. It'll be up at some point in one of the episodes. Got another email here from Brian. The subject is, what happened to your podcast? Valid question. It's been 3 weeks since the last
2.5 weeks, I think.
Yeah, we did have one scheduled. Actually, this one was scheduled about a week or so ago, but a few technical glitches buggered that up, so it didn't happen. In reality, life happened, some technical glitches happened, and we hadn't been able to get an episode posted. But in some good news, we've decided that instead of doing our random posting and just randomly getting the podcast going whenever we kind of all lined up, we're going to start doing a set day of Wednesdays. So stay tuned for that. Every Wednesday, we're going to be doing the podcast. Hopefully all of us can make it. We're going to set it up so that if one or two of us is absent or unable to make it, the podcast is still going to run. So it's going to be Wednesday evenings. Stay tuned for that. But hopefully there'll be no more emails of what happened to your podcast, because you can just check out Wednesdays and we'll be there.
Yeah, I think the problem up to this point, because we're still at amateur hour for our skill set level here, is that we're all shift workers and trying to arrange 3 or more schedules and to try and find a day that works for everybody. It usually ends up being harder than you would realize. So I think by setting a set day, we'll just probably increase the panelist numbers, and hey, whoever shows.
Exactly. So now it's going to be Prepper Podcast Wednesdays.
Love it.
We had an interesting email from a band in France, if I remember correctly. Let's see here. Yeah, from Paris. So they just sent us a link to their latest songs. They listened to the podcast, figured they'd just send in some collaborations that they've put together. So if you're into electronic type music, break out the glow sticks and head over to the link that I've put in the show notes here and have a listen to their latest music. If that's your type of tune, then check it out.
Is that the band name? Pepper Juice?
Pepper Juice is the band name, yeah. And they're on soundcloud.com/pepperjuice. So
if they would change the name to Prepper Juice, that'd even make me better.
When I first read it, I was kind of afraid to open the email. But then I realized that it said pepper, not prepper. So I'm like, okay, this might be safe. Yeah. But so if electronic music is your kind of thing, go for it. But bring the glow sticks.
Right on.
Yeah. And you know what? We did have. We had one other on Podbean. I was going to pull it up here. It's logged me out. We had. Here it is here. So from Welsh Forge, just says, great show, inspired me to reach out to find the local ham group to see about getting licensed. So glad to hear that it's inspiring people to reach out to various locations in their community and partake in certain things they may not have. So appreciate it.
Awesome.
So just as a reminder for our listeners as well, judging by the fact that we kind of try and pursue the preparedness lifestyle, a lot of us don't live in urban areas where there's high-speed internet. And so I guess you can't have a doomstead in high speed too. So we had one YouTube comment last week about audio levels and our incessant laughter. So audio levels are as a result of satellite internet and or low speed internet, depending on where I am and where the other guys are.
The pigeons can only fly so fast.
That's right. The semaphore only works at a certain speed, and so do appreciate your patience with that. But if you're going to live out in the sticks, you can't always have high speed. And the other thing with our incessant laughter, I do apologize for enjoying doing this, but it is something we do for free. So if we don't enjoy it, we're not going to do it.
I don't apologize for that. If it's not fun, it's not worth doing.
Exactly.
So we're gonna laugh. We're gonna enjoy it, and that's just how it is, because it's not worth doing otherwise.
Yep. And if we're laughing, I make the assumption that everybody else listening is most likely laughing as well, because, well, we all found it funny. So I'm pretty sure you guys did too.
The difference is that they're laughing at us and we're laughing with us. I'm okay with that. I am.
I think sometimes you guys
Just
are
how it
laughing
goes.
at me. I don't know.
I'm definitely laughing at you, Ian.
Yeah, there are times where we're laughing at you, yes.
Awesome.
All right. Where are we in the
Outro.
I've lost track.
Yeah, I lost track as well.
There we go. As long as it's all of us, then we're okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good.
This is what editing is for, right? So
You got it. So,
We're not retreating. We're advancing in a new direction.
yes, that's exactly what's happening here. So with that, I will bring episode number 24 of the Canadian Prepper podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, if I could talk, or your favorite podcast app. Please help us out. Take a few minutes and submit a review. It helps other people find us. You can also find us at prepperpodcast.ca.
Suppose you can only find us on YouTube for a very short time. Other than that, it's going to have to be, what is it? Apple Podcast is going to be where it's going to live from now on. So that's one of those other news items that iTunes is going away. Anywho, we record these shows live on YouTube chats. If you want early access or an early peek at the show, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Island Retreat. Click on the notifications tab. It gives you an alert when we're going live. And feel free to leave us comments. Every so often, we even look at them and respond to them. I think Eric's done a good job of keeping up on the YouTube comments on this episode. If you want to contact me directly, you can find me on Instagram at ppswo.
all right, you can reach Ian directly by emailing me at theislandretreat@gmail.com. And you can also find me giving my 2 cents worth on a Canadian Patriot podcast, also available on iTunes and YouTube. There you'll find us exposing more government waste, squirreling off on the odd firearms-related conversation, and generally drowning our sorrows online versus at the local watering hole.
For myself, you can reach me directly by email at hfxprepper@gmail.com.
All right. And if you could check out rapidsurvival.com, you can get me there on the live chat while you're buying some prepper gear and possibly some lockpicking equipment. You can also email me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca. Of course, while you're still buying that prepper gear at Rapid Survival. Thanks for joining us, and tune in next episode where we are going to be discussing cast iron goodness. So until next time, be prepared, stay safe,
and keep learning.